Jody Enck, Stephanie Herrick, and Kevin McGowan all share the trait of being past presidents of the Cayuga Bird Club. And they're going to tell us about the club's trip to Cuba. And we hear about the club's trips a lot beforehand, and this is really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about what happened on that trip. So I'll hand it over to you three.
Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate that. I think most of you know who I am. I'm Jody Enck. And I just want to say that we're going to have a multi-person presentation here tonight. There were 13 of us that went on this trip, and 3 of us are going to give our reminiscence, and then we'll keep that as short as we can. And then there will be a question and answer period, and more of the participants who went are in the room here, and they can join us for the Q&A to help share some of their memories of the trip as well. All right, so with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the background. I'm going to give a little bit of context about our international trips and how we ended up going to Cuba. I'm going to do that by addressing several really basic questions. The first one is, why does the CBC even take these international trips? Well, obviously, we like to see birds. We like to experience the people, the places, and the culture of the countries that we go visit. I'm a conservationist, and many of you in this room are also a conservationist, so we like to learn about bird conservation. And as we saw up on the budget report, these are also fundraisers for the club. So essentially, for everybody who goes on the trip, we get $200 back from Holbrook Travel, who we work with on these trips, as a fundraiser. So if 10 people go, we get $2,000 back. And last year, because we had 2 trips, we had over $4,000 that we got back to use for other club projects. I want to point out that as a conservationist, one of the things that I look for when we go on these trips, like when we went to Cuba, is what's going on with the bird habitat there relative to what we experience here in Ithaca. So in Cuba, I noticed things like there's a lot of hurricane damage to the forests that we saw when we were driving around the countryside. We also saw a lot of out-of-control wildfires that were coming right up to the highway. So these are the kinds of things that the birds have to deal with there, as well as the people, obviously, but things that we don't necessarily face here in Ithaca. And they're kind of different kinds of challenges. At the same time, we have these opportunities to really learn about success stories in conservation. And we had a couple of really good bird guides on our trip, one of whom was Alejandro Llanes, who is a very accomplished ornithologist. He has over 50 journal articles to his credit. He does bird banding in Cuba. He has a youth birding group. I took down a big box of supplies for him from his brother who's in Miami, because you can't send packages there. You have to hand deliver them, basically. So I took things down for both the youth birding group and bird banding, which is a whole other story in terms of how to get that through their customs at the airport. But anyway, we have these opportunities to meet with people like him and our other bird guide, whose name was Attila Perez. He was the cultural guide, also a great bird guide on the trip, and just learn about conservation success stories in those countries. So it's a lot of fun to do that. Second question, how do these kinds of trips even come about? Well, in this case, for Cuba, Wes Blauvelt came up to me and he said, "Hey, has the Bird Club ever thought about going to Cuba?" And I said, "Well, do you want to go to Cuba?" And he says, "Yeah." And I said, "Why?" And he told me about all the different reasons. And so the way it works is after somebody in the club suggests a destination, I do a lot of background work. And I try to find out, okay, where are the birds? Where are the places to go see birds? And then I contact my person at Holbrook, who I work with. Now, Holbrook has a lot of canned trips already available. I don't want to use their canned trips. I want to have our trips be really focused on what we want to do and where we want to go and what we want to see. And so I work back and forth with Holbrook until we come up with a proposal from them. And then we negotiate and say, no, that's not what we want, or yes, it is, but more of this and less of that. And finally, we get to a point where we say, okay, we're good. And that whole process takes about 75 to 100 hours of work to get to that stage, so it takes some time. But right now we have actually 2 trips, as Stephanie pointed out. We've got the Ecuador trip coming up, and then a Panama trip that just got active today. So it's accepting people to sign up as of today. So all of that stuff happens before the trip. And then during the trip, my role is usually to go and be a people manager. So I'm trying to pay attention to how things are going in terms of interactions between all of the people, between all the participants and the guides. Who's having a cranky day? I'm always having a cranky day. So, I know what that's like, and try to keep everything running smoothly. I'm also trying to be the last one down the trail to make sure there's no stragglers, nobody gets lost, nobody gets bit by a snake, things like that. Little things. And then I'm also keeping the eBird checklist. And I have a field notebook that I keep with me, and I take all the notes of all the birds and everything. I just turn the phone on for the track, and then I keep all the notes in the field notebook so I can transfer them later. But I can take also these notes about conservation things that we hear about, what people are doing, because I'm also a conservation social scientist. So I study the birders as I go along, and they don't know that, but I do. So every night I try to make sure I can, when we have Wi-Fi, which in Cuba was not every night. But when we have Wi-Fi, I try to upload all the eBird lists and share them with everybody for that day to try to keep up on that. And then every night during these trips, often it's the guide, the in-country guide, that reads the list of birds we've seen that day. But in Cuba, none of the guides wanted to do it, so I did that too, which was a lot of fun. And then after the trip, coming back, put together the trip list and all the report, and write up a little article usually for the newsletter and things like that. But I also have a big debrief with Holbrook. So that's often like 2 hours on the telephone. And often it's nitpicky stuff. Oh, we could have done a little better over here. This went really well, that kind of thing. But sometimes the feedback is more substantial. And we have one trip, not Cuba, but another trip where things just didn't go so well with the guide. And long story short, that guide actually got sent back to guide school because of the feedback that we provided. So these trips are real learning experiences. We learn a lot, Holbrook learns a lot, and the whole relationship gets better in the future. Okay, so when do we go? See what we're doing with the questions here? When do we choose to go on these sorts of things? Well, there's a lot of different factors at play. Some of it depends on when the people who say they want to go on this trip can go. And so sometimes we've had educators who said, I can't go in the winter or during migration because I'm teaching then. So I can only go in the summer. So we've set up some summer trips. Sometimes it depends on going, when the birds are migrating. So we have opportunities to see birds. And that's what happened in Cuba. We went during migration, and we got to see migrant birds as well as resident birds in Cuba. And then there's other factors involved, like when's the rainy season, the dry season, when are the birds breeding, when are they most active, when can we actually see them and encounter them, and also what else is going on in the country, so when can we actually get into lodges or the other places where we're going to stay. Lots of things going on, but we want to try to maximize our opportunity to see cool birds like the bee hummingbird, the smallest bird in the world, that we got to see both male and female of in Cuba. And you'll notice that bird is actually feeding out of a little syringe. It's not even feeding out of a normal hummingbird feeder. So think of a ruby-throated hummingbird and then a bird that's only about 3/4 the size of a ruby-throat. That's what a bee hummingbird is like. Okay, where have we gone? Many of you may not remember this, but a few of you might, that we actually had a trip to Honduras that a small number of people went on back in 2017. And Tracy, our new president, was one of those people, and Josh Snodgrass was another one, and Becky Hansen, who now has moved to Texas, was another one. And then we started a relationship with Holbrook Travel. And so in 2018, we went to Costa Rica, and we got that trip because Holbrook had worked with a group actually out in Idaho to put a trip together, and something got all messed up with the dates. And so all of a sudden, the Idaho people couldn't go. And so Holbrook called us like 2 months before that trip was supposed to go and said, hey, does your club want to take it over? Talked to some people here, and then we ended up going. It worked out. That was our first trip. We liked it so much that we decided we put another trip to Costa Rica together that we went right before the pandemic in February of 2020. The next trip was right after COVID, as COVID was coming out. In fact, we had to get tested the day before we left the country here. We had to get tested in Colombia before we came back, that sort of thing. But we went to the Colombian Andes in 2021. Then we took our first trip to Ecuador in 2022. And that was a trip to southern Ecuador where Holbrook Travel had never gone before. And their in-country folks, the Latin Roots group who runs their in-country tours, had never worked down there, but we really wanted to go because there's some Hokotoco Foundation lodges and really cool birds that we wanted to go see. So we helped Holbrook to expand where they go by requesting that trip. The next year we went back to northern Ecuador with an extension into the Amazon basin. In 2024, we went in the springtime to Belize and Guatemala during migration. This year in the spring, we went to Cuba. And then in July, we went to Peru with an extension to the Andes and Machu Picchu. And now we have 2 trips coming up that are on the books, and I'm working on a third, this one out of the Americas to Madagascar. I want to say one other thing, and we always see really cool birds. We see cool birds just like the Stygian owl that we saw in the Botanic Gardens in Havana. We also, on this trip, it was educational, and so we had to meet with a lot of Cuban individuals and business owners, not government-sponsored ones, but private business owners. And so we met this guy, Ariel, who is an artist, really cool cards that he made and everything. But think about in Cuba, they have an embargo, okay? How do you get supplies? How do you get art supplies? How do you get paint? How do you get paper even to make your cards? So you know what he does? He gets trash paper, recycled paper, and he makes his own paper for the cards. And so we got to see that whole process when we were there, which is really cool. So who goes on these trips? So far, there have been 46 different individuals, plus me, who goes in there. And even though this is a fundraiser for the Cayuga Bird Club, not everybody who goes is a Cayuga Bird Club member. It's open to anybody in the world who wants to go. So we've had people from Arkansas, California, Florida, Michigan, Missouri, New York, Ohio, Oklahoma, and Oregon so far go on these trips. It's been a really fun thing. Many of these people are first-time travelers, as I'll show you in just a second, but we're also starting to develop a cohort of more experienced travelers, which is a godsend in some ways because the travel itself can be a little tricky, and so having done it a couple times, you know what to expect and how to do it. And then even the day-to-day kind of patterns of what to expect on the trip, even though it differs from country to country, there's a lot of similarities. And so having people who are really experienced really adds a lot to the group dynamic as we go there. So the other thing I wanted to point out is that when we went to Cuba, a lot of us took down things to donate because people just don't have much because of the embargo. So they don't have basic supplies to, daily kinds of things like household supplies or toiletries or over-the-counter medicines, that kind of stuff. And so we took down a lot of things and then put them in bags and stopped along the way and gave them to just people we met out in the rural areas or kind of the cleaning staff, at places where we stayed and stuff like that. And so that top picture shows actually Jamie Leff and our guide Attila Perez going up to a house and delivering a package. Also, in the second picture there just shows people drying beans. And so think about it. Things that we might put in a mechanical device to dry, they don't have access to the mechanical device. They don't have a source of power that's going to run every day. And so they have to use things like their own labor and the sunshine. So they're very ingenious in terms of how they do things. And then we also visited more kind of entrepreneurs. And so this tobacco farmer was hand rolling us some Cuban cigars, which was really cool. And by the way, if you buy Cuban cigars from the government suppliers in Havana, for example, you can only bring back 2 legally. If you buy it from him, you can bring back like 25 legally. And so there's a reason for working with the entrepreneurs instead of the government there. So, all right, I said a little more about the people. So you don't have to read any of this because it's all X's on there anyway. All you have to look at is patterns. So that column on the far left, those are not people's names. They could be, but they're states where those people are from. So each line represents a person, basically. And all this shows is that for each of our trips, The X's, if you take a look at those big long lines of X's that go down, those are all new people who have never traveled with us before. So each trip basically has a whole bunch of new people who are experiencing these kinds of trips for the very first time. And then up above that are people who are going back again and again now. And those are the experienced travelers who are coming back for repeat trips. So you can see that lots of the trips are well attended by first-time people. And I wouldn't just point out, I don't know if I can do this. This is Cuba, right there. So in Cuba, we had 13 total participants. 8 of them were first-time travelers with us. That's not to say they didn't travel anywhere else in the world to go birding before, but not with us on a Holbrook trip. So there were 13 of them, and then 5 people were repeat customers, basically. You'll notice the very last trip was our Peruvian trip this past summer, and that's the exception to the rule. We only have one person who had never been on a trip with us before, and everybody else had been. One of the reasons we were able to do 2 trips in the same year, only 4 months apart, is because we had different clientele for that. So there was a market for these trips with different kinds of people who went to those 2 different destinations.
Just a comment on that too. The fellow from Missouri actually had relatives who were from like the Elmira area.
Right. So we had a connection to New York.
Small world.
Yeah. All right. What about Cuba? I'm running out of questions, you can see here. So getting down to the end of my part. We had 13 participants, 8 days, so about a week. We started in Havana. We went west to the Vinales area, and then went back east to the Bay of Pigs and the Zapata Swamp, which is a world-renowned wetland area, but also world-renowned for birding. We saw about 130 bird species, which on most of our trips, it's not a lot. When we went to Peru later in the summer, we saw over 330 species in a slightly longer period of time. But notice that number 130. Think about Cuba and how many birds there are to even see in Cuba. There's not as many there as there are in places. I mean, in New York State, and here in Tompkins County this year, I'm probably going to see something like 230 species in Tompkins County alone this year without even trying hard for a big year. And as I showed on an earlier slide, our guide, Alejandro Llanes, got an award in 2022 for having set the record for a big year, an entire year in the country of Cuba, 261 species. We saw half that many in 1 week with him as a guide. We did good. We did really good. And there are 26 endemic bird species in Cuba. That is to say, those bird species exist there and nowhere else in the world. We saw 24 out of 26. Pretty good. We also saw 20 birds that had the name Cuban in them. A couple of them were some of these endemic, but things like Cuban peewee, Cuban toady, Cuban trogon, Cuban emerald, on and on and on. 20 of those species. It was really fun. Last thing I want to say is that to go to Cuba, you actually have to get permission from the U.S. State Department. And so we have to carry a letter with us that says the purpose of why we're there, which is educational and to benefit the Cuban people. We're not there to benefit the Cuban government in any way, shape, or form. So we take that, and that allowed us to schedule all these different meetings with all people all around the island, wherever we went. One of the cool things we got to do is we got to meet with Nils Navarro, who is the author of the most useful field guide to birds in Cuba. And he's a great birder and a great artist. So we met with him and his wife at their house, and he showed us all this artwork and everything. And then several people here in the room actually got to buy some of that artwork and bring it home. So again, it's just another cool thing there. So I'm going to end my part by saying that Cuba, it's so near and yet so far. It's really different because of the trade embargoes, the crushing poverty that these people have to live under, and a very tenuous electric grid. We were out of power for most of 4 out of the 8 days that we were there. It's challenging. It's really challenging for the people who live there, but it's also challenging for ecotourists who go and want to, have a good experience. But The people are so warm and friendly and ingenious, they find ways of doing things. You know, we couldn't stay in hotels because they're all government owned, and so we have to stay in these things called casas particulares, which are like almost like Airbnbs a little bit. They're like private homes, but they have individual rooms with a bathroom. And so like my room in this one place, you know, it came out in the morning, they had breakfast for me on a little table in an alleyway, but it was before sunrise. And so it's pitch dark and the power's out and you can't do anything. So what do? They pull out their motorcycle and they turn the headlamp on so I can eat breakfast by motorcycle headlamp. They're very ingenious. And they also are super proud to show you everything that their country has to offer. And now Stephanie's going to take over and tell you more about that.
So Cuba was my fourth Cayuga Bird Club international trip through Holbrook. Previously, I had been with my husband to Ecuador twice, then to Belize and Guatemala. Cuba wasn't really a place that had previously come into my mind or on my radar as far as wanting to go there, but after talking about some of the birds we would see and realizing it was a whole lot closer than some of these previous places we had gone, I'm like, we'll go to Cuba. So there, I learned many of the things that Jody just noted, that Cuba is an island of rich history and resilient people, a country of contrasts, of generosity and poverty, hardship and ease, complexity, simplicity, beauty, and decay. So while I took over 300 photos on this 8-day trip, I'm going to share just a handful of my own, plus some contributions from fellow travelers that are woven into a yarn that illustrates the contrasts and the fun that we had. So Jody mentioned that we started and ended our trip in Havana. The old city was fascinating, and everywhere you looked, you could see the haves and the have-nots in Havana. You saw beauty and decay. One was right around the corner from the other, and we were told that there was no homelessness in Cuba, yet even while everyone has a place to look, you would just see these signs of inequities that were astounding to me. Outside of Havana, there were even more hours where we didn't have electricity than when we did have electricity. And we found ourselves enlightened and instructed and inspired by the perseverance of Cubans. On the left, you see our air-conditioned bus that we, los turistas, had while passing by is an old dump truck that is packed to the rails with riders. Often outside of Havana, you'd see people on motorcycles or scooters or riders on horseback or driving a horse or ox-drawn wagon. We made it our practice to be grateful, to thank people, to be polite, to be generous in return, but seeing things like this was really eye-opening. It's not something that I was used to. What we were told was that when things get bad, we smoke and we drink. So some of us did, while others danced. We birded everywhere we could. Not a single place was off limits when it came to birding, so we birded everywhere. And we were rewarded by the splendor that abounded through the country. This was a view from a local restaurant looking out over the Vinales Valley. No touch-up or anything there. And another different glorious view of the Vinales Valley with the towering Mogotes in the distance, seen from another local farm-to-table restaurant. And of course, we were graced by the sights and sounds of some of the most glorious birds. And I want to play this for you. Play for me. Is it going to work?
Yeah.
So imagine that sound coming out of that bird. It doesn't even sound like a bird, but it was mesmerizing. Oops. Stop that. So in the end, we had excellent care and guidance and driving skills of Attila, Alejandro, and Vladimir, respectively. And I returned home with my Cuba list, personal Cuba list, at 123 species, because I didn't see everything that everybody else did, with 51 lifers, and 22 of which were endemics. I found that I was utterly enchanted by Cuba, but would I ever go back to search for those couple other endemics or savor another dip in the crystal clear waters of the Bay of Pigs? I don't know. There's just still so much more of the world to see, but I will always have these friendships and these memories to look back on fondly, and for that I am so very grateful. Next up is Kevin McGowan, who will be sharing some of the birds of Cuba. Kevin?
Well, those of you who know me know that I'm a lot more interested in birds than people, and so this is great. This is great. It's we did see a lot of birds. Jody showed you the numbers. I personally, what did I have? I had.
You've got a slide where it shows up.
Oh, do I? Okay, good. I'm glad you looked at it. Just, that's a nasty little thing there, isn't it?
Go away.
Stop. So for me, I had a whole bunch of lifers. One of the things about going to Cuba is there are lots of endemics. Okay, it's an island. There are lots of things that are found only on that island. Like Jody said, that there were approximately 27 Cuban endemics. There are also a bunch of things that are near endemics, that are regional endemics, that are on some of the islands nearby, but mostly in Cuba. So we had a whole bunch of those to look forward to. And for me, I got 37 live birds, which is pretty good. And what I call 2 cleanups. I had 2 birds that I'd seen in Florida or iffy circumstances, and got to actually see them and hear them and clean that pencil mark, what used to be a pencil mark in my paper checklists up. There are, as I said, a lot of Cuban endemics. There are also a number of things that are endemic families, a couple of those. I had, being a crazy ornithologist, I think not just in terms of species, but I think in terms of families and genera and stuff like that. And so there were, what I saw during the trip, again, I didn't see everything either, but I did see 3 new endemic families, or 3 new families to me. And one of them is Cuban toady, which is one of the most adorable birds in Cuba. It is. It's about the size of a chickadee, and it's related to kingfishers. And they're actually, it's as I say, a new family for me. It's easy to remember because it's Toadidae, and all bird families end in "ed," so the toadies is Toadidae. That's easy. And there are actually 5 species in the Greater Antilles in the Caribbean. There's 1 in Puerto Rico, 1 in Jamaica, 1 in Cuba, then 2 on Hispaniola. And so this was a completely new family and just an adorable bird. It's also a forest bird, so it's not as easy to see sitting out and to get good photographs. And I want to say, compared to a lot of the photographs you've seen and in like Ken Haas's presentation, stuff like that, this ain't going to be that. Okay? I took a lot of photos, but not all of them are great. Anyway, so Toadidae was fun for me because a new family, another family, and this is as good as I could do with it. It's not exactly a rare bird, but this is as good as I could get. This is Western Spindalis. This is the family Spindalidae, and they used to be called the stripe-headed tanager. That you may have heard of that. There's been the very few that make it into the Florida Keys and stuff like that over the years. And when I started birding, it wasn't in the first bird guide I had, but in subsequent ones, It came in as stripe-headed tanager, and now it's found its own thing, and it's more than one species. So this was kind of fun for me. It's a beautiful bird. It's just a lovely set, like a sunset on its chest. Just a beautiful colors. And that was a new family for me. But the other species are also found other places in the Caribbean, so it's not an endemic family. But the last family that was new to me is a family that's endemic to Peru. There are only two species in it. One we saw, the yellow-headed warbler. The other is the Oriente warbler, which is found in the eastern part of Cuba that we did not get to. And this is the family. I have to look at it because it's not one that I've actually known, because it hasn't existed for very long, honestly. It's recently been split out, these two species, out of warblers. They're not warblers. They're something completely different, the Cuban warblers. It's called Teratistridae. Anybody ever heard of that? Probably not. But it was fun because that was an endemic family. That one was, you have to, if you want to do all the families in the world, I know some crazy people that are trying to see they're not trying to see every bird in the world. They're trying to see every bird family. And you have to go to Cuba for this one. So we also saw some beautiful birds like the blue-headed quail dove. And again, my ornithological nerdiness comes up. This is in its own genus, and therefore the genus is endemic to Cuba. And you have to go to Cuba if you want to see all the genera in the world. I don't know anybody doing that, but you could. And it's an absolutely beautiful bird walking through the forest. And in fact, when we saw it, we went to this place where there's a wall across the trail that has windows through it, and we were watching down the trail for these, and some quail doves start walking up to us, and we're so excited about, oh wow, they're coming. This is only found in Cuba, so it's a beautiful bird, so we're excited, and then we turn around and there was one walking right behind us. And a few people have some video of them, it's like, oh, and turn around, take the picture there. It was really pretty great. And they do, the sexes look pretty much alike, but one of the males was displaying to the female and did a nice bow thing and stick its rump up in the air. And that was one of the things that one of our colleague Leanne Van Leer, some of you know, when she sees a live bird, she does a lifer dance. And she's into doing a lifer dance. We got real buy-in from a bunch of the people on the trip, and especially of our guide, that he's a good dancer. So with her dance ends with a little flash of tail up in the air like the male was doing. So this was a real fun thing in another endemic genus. I have to talk about, this is actually not a bad picture for a Zapata wren, but in that Zapata swamp, which is in the southwestern portion of Cuba, it has a lot in common. Nope, it doesn't do it either. With the Everglades. It's a very large swamp marsh, basically, and has a number of things that are actually endemic to it. It has some of the same problems going on that the Everglades do with invasion of some of the same, like Australian plants and things like that. And the two of our target birds were Zapata wren and Zapata sparrow. There's also the rarest bird. It's either the rarest bird or the most recently extinct bird in Cuba is a Zapata wren. Zapata rail, which has not been seen in a decade or so now, and it's probably gone. So that was, we were hoping for a Zapata rail, but we were not counting on a Zapata rail. But we were hoping for Zapata wren and Zapata sparrow. Zapata wren, this is pretty emblematic of what it was. We heard it calling a lot, like a marsh wren. You can hear them a lot and see them sometimes. So we got some decent glimpses. I got no good pictures. These two birds are also actually in their own genera. They're separate. They're not closely related with either of the with any of the other wrens or sparrows. They're sort of in their little group. So again, endemic genera for Cuba, which is another one for the bird nerds. Okay, so Jody mentioned there are a lot of birds called Cuban and have Cuban in the name, and I'm sort of going to start going through a bunch of them, and I'll make some asides as we go. Cuban blackhawk, which is there are a number of blackhawks in the tropics. They're big, very broad-winged birds that forage in the coastal marshes and things like that. And this one's only found in Cuba, so that was cool. There's a Cuban blackbird that's built very much like a red-winged blackbird, which is probably because there are like 3 of those in Cuba that they're hard to tell apart. Did you ever think you'd have trouble distinguishing a red-winged blackbird from anything else? Cuba, you do. And then there's Cuban bullfinch. Very pretty. This is the male with a nice big thick bill. That there are a number of bullfinches in the tropics. This one's only in Cuba. Then Cuban crow, which was one of the things I wanted to see. We did not see the endemic Cuban palm crow that was only recently split off from the other palm crow to be its own species, and it's completely in Cuba. It's in the eastern side, and we were on the western side, so we did not get to see that. And we did see some Cuban crows, but honestly, I had gone, Leanne Van Leer and I had gone 10 years ago to the Turks and Caicos Islands because I found out there were Cuban crows there. I didn't know that they got anywhere but Cuba. So it's like, okay, I'll probably never get to Cuba. So I'm gonna go to Turks and Caicos and see the Cuban crows there. And we did see Cuban crows, and we saw them do some spectacular stuff. This is what we saw Cuban crows do in Cuba, is sit there and call and then fly away. All right, that's about as much as we saw them do. In Turks and Caicos, this is a pair of Cuban crows. You can see 2 beaks there, but you only see 2 feet up at the top. And what was happening was we were watching this pair along the road. The one flew up onto a wire, and then the other one flew up on the wire, and the first one flips upside down and is hanging upside down. And then the other one flips upside down and wraps itself around the other one, doing some kind of strange courtship that I have never seen any bird anywhere. This is not described in the literature. It was just, what? And I love those what moments. This was great. So anyway, that's just an aside. Cuban crows were very interesting. They're a different kind of crow than what we have. There's a radiation. There are 2 or 3 species. They're larger. They have longer necks, and they sound like parrots, not like crows. They're very different, and I've never heard of anybody. I've seen American crows and fish crows hang upside down from things, but never seen them do anything where they're all twined together. So this was really something special. Okay, Cuban emerald. This is we only saw 2 hummingbird species on the trip, and this was by far the most common one. It's a fairly big hummingbird with a very long forked tail. And that was very cool. This is I think a near endemic or a regional endemic. But the bird, of course, that we were looking for was the bee hummingbird, which is the smallest bird in the world. And we only saw that in one place. But we got really good looks at the female. This is the best shot I could get of a male, because there are only a couple coming in, and they weren't being all that cooperative. But they are small, although ruby-throated hummingbird is very small. And if you go to the tropics, you'll be amazed at how much bigger most of the hummingbirds are. So this isn't that shockingly small when you're used to ruby throats, but it still is the smallest bird in the world, and we saw it. So that made it super cool. Okay, also the Cuban grass quit. This is a little seed-eating bird. Actually, I think it's in the tanager family. And this is as good as I could do with the photograph, but we also got to see them building a nest. And can you tell what's going on with that nest? It's not finished. The bird's flying away from it. It's, you think of something like a goldfinch making a nest, a little cup in a bush somewhere. I talked to somebody who knows nests and mentioned that I had a picture of we're working on a nest and eggs course right now in Bird Academy at the lab. And so we've been talking about nests a lot, and I told Robin Bailey, who's going to be the face of the course and is writing most of it, I mentioned that I had a grass squid nest, and she thought, oh, was it down in the grass and a little cup in the grass, which makes sense. And it's like, no, actually it's a globular nest, and the entrance to that is on the side. So it's not hung down with you don't go in from the top like an oriole nest. It's a globular nest with a thing on the side. So I thought that was pretty cool. I did not know that. I did not know that the grass squids did this. I thought they just nested like a goldfinch or something, but they don't. Okay, more Cuban. Cuban green woodpecker, which again is endemic to Cuba. I never did get a good picture of them, but we got some pretty decent looks at them. And we had some other, well, this is actually a pretty good look compared to the other endemic woodpecker that we saw, which was Fernandina's flicker, which I only saw once, and it was not a good photo setup for that. So I apologize for putting something up like this, but this was an endemic. It definitely was a flicker. You can see the mustache there. And it's just a little more stripy all over than our flickers. No spots, mostly just stripes. But by far the most common woodpecker that we saw was the West Indian woodpecker, which is not a Cuban endemic. It's found across, as the name would suggest, a number of the islands in the Caribbean, but they were most everywhere. They were really cool. You can see that it's related to the red-bellied woodpecker. And there are a bunch of red-bellied woodpecker-looking birds throughout the Americas. Like you may have seen golden-fronted woodpecker in the west, or Gila woodpecker. And there are a whole bunch of those that get into the Caribbean and down into Central and South America. And these guys are really fun. And we got to actually see them feeding at an active nest in a telephone pole, which was really fun to sort of stumble across. And look at I guess it's the male on the right, what he's doing when the female goes in with the food. It's like, what is he doing? It's just a sort of a strange posture display that he's doing. Okay, Cuban again, Cuban oriole. I didn't get any good pictures of the adults. This is not a male and a female. This is an adult on the left and an immature bird on the right. That they look very different by age, but the sexes look pretty much the same. And that's true about a whole bunch of birds that we have representatives of up here that males and females look really different. But in the tropics, they look alike, and they look like males. Okay, and so there's a whole bunch of weirdness about that idea. Is do birds get bright to show off, the males show off? Or do the females get dull to hide when they're the ones doing most of the egg laying? And it's like it isn't the answer that one would think living just in New York and only looking at New York birds. So this was kind of cool to see. Cuban parrot. There's an Amazon. This is the Cuban Amazon parrot that is a big sort of polywinter type bird that we finally got some looks at. That somebody had seen one, and it's like, oh well, we got out of that side of the bus, and then we didn't see it off the other side of the bus, and so we were looking for a few days, and I forget exactly where we were on the Bay of Pigs, and here we were at our where we were staying out in the little courtyard, and all of a sudden this guy flies in, and he starts coming over and clearly was at home here and started eating he's chipping into, you can see here if I can do this, where he's been chewing off all the concrete on the wall, and it turns out this was somebody's pet. It was very disappointing. It's like, oh, this is so great. This is so great. And then it's like, you can't count it. because it's a pet, and it comes in every evening. It comes home, basically. But we did finally get to see some for Rio. They're just not this close and not this friendly. Cuban peewee. This is very much like our peewees. They were very common around the island, and this is one of the things that Jody mentioned, that relative to something like Ecuador, there aren't that many bird species in Cuba. And what I've noticed here and in other island places that I've visited, like in the Virgin Islands, in the Marianas Islands, and what I find is that you have not much stratification. Like here or someplace in Ecuador, you go up another 1,000 feet and you get different species, right? Or you just make any little habitat change and you get different species. But what's happening in Cuba and these other places that I visited is they're everywhere, right? You see stuff, and these guys at ocean sea level, and then we also had them at the top of the hills, at 2,000 plus feet, something like that. And so you have the same sort of suite of birds that are using a greater variation of habitats when there's not so much competition from other things. It's called ecological release, where you take a bird and put it, and it'll go in a whole bunch of things. But if you go to some place where it's crowded, you have to find your niche, and you just stay there. So we saw a lot of Cuban peewees, which was really nice. Cuban pygmy owl. Can you see it there, the little pygmy owl? There we go. This was, they're challenging little owls in the daytime, but it was fun. This is a tiny little owlets. There are a bunch of pygmy owls up throughout the Americas, and this was a pretty typical one. Other owls that we saw, not called Cuban. This was a bare-legged owl, which is a Cuban endemic. And you can see that we saw this one coming out of the hole, and I managed to get a picture of it that shows its bare legs. It gives it its name. Most owls have feathers down to their toes, often including their toes, but not this one. And then we saw the Stygian owl that Jody showed a picture of. Well, this is on our first day. And I have not seen this bird before. I have not seen it it's in the neotropics. I've been in places where it is. This bird is about as tall as a great horned owl. But you can see it looks sort of like that. But you see how close together the two ears are? Do you recognize any birds around here that are like that? Long-eared owl. Same genus as the long-eared owl. It's just like a big, dark, long-eared owl. There was actually one that made it into Texas a couple of years ago. But it's very impressive. A neat bird to see, something I've wanted to see for a while. Back to the Cubans. We already talked about the Cuban solitaire, which is a thrush. And I'm glad you played the song, because I didn't actually get that put into this very strange song. And this is found only in those western mountains above the Vinales Valley. And I actually was talking to a cousin of mine who's an avid birder and a retired physician, and he and his wife have traveled almost literally everywhere in the world. And he'll say things like, he was saying things like, oh yeah, the second time we went to New Caledonia, we did this. And so he said they had a real good trip through Cuba, but they missed the solitaire in the Western Mountains. So that made me feel better. Cuban trogon. Cuban trogon, there are lots of trogons in the world. They're actually in Africa as well as in the neotropics. I've seen a number of them. They're always fun to see. I like this one especially because look at the tail. The tail's all jagged and cool. Like this is Cuba's national bird, basically because it's the same color as their flag. And we did get some pretty good looks at them. Got to hear them. They were visiting what looked like a nest hole at the one spot where we were. And I always think that trogons are special. They're also cool because sometimes they're very hard to find. Sometimes they're like cuckoos around here, whereas you hear them, they're there. you can't find them. But then when you find them, they just sit there. You know, and that's a great thing. If you can find one, you can probably take good pictures of it if you're better at it than I am. Then another Cuban thing, the Cuban vireo. This was a very frustrating bird for me because we heard it like 3 or 4 days before I ever actually got to see one. And it is kind of a white-eye-ish vireo up in the top of the short shrubs or short trees. And then going to things not named Cuban anymore, but that are still endemic or semi-endemic, regional endemics. The olive-capped warbler is a lot like a yellow-throated warbler that you may have seen in the South. We have had them very rarely. Likes to be in the pines. This is also found in the Bahamas, so it's not strictly an endemic, but it's still a pretty cool bird. And then the red-shouldered blackbird, which acts a lot like a red-winged blackbird. This one is a little more restricted in range. We only got to see this like the one day. And this may be a female on the right. They do have red on their wing like red-winged blackbird. They look very much like a red-winged blackbird. But the females again look like the males. They aren't brown and splotchy like our red-winged blackbirds. The females are black, and they just have less or no red in the wing. And so this one is a true Cuban endemic, and again, we didn't see them except for like 2 days. On the other hand, the tawny-shouldered blackbird also looks like a red-winged blackbird. They were everywhere, and they actually get out onto a couple of other islands, so they're a regional endemic and not a strict endemic. And they never really flash the big epaulets like a male red-winged blackbird does, but they sure look like a red-winged blackbird. And again, the one without the red on the shoulder is a female. So pretty cool. And the other very common blackbird, not an endemic, but a really cool bird was the greater Antillean grackle, and they were everywhere. And they have the weird thing, I did not get a photo of them flying, where they actually fold their tail so that it's in a, just like this. Instead of being like that, it's folded like that, and they fly with it like that. And it's with sort of this big fan up as they fly. They're very, very interesting birds, and they were everywhere. It was really cool. Another bird that's not an endemic, but is found over a fair bit of the Caribbean, is one I've wanted to see for a while. This is a red-legged thrush, and this is one of my favorite birds from the trip, just because they're so cool. It's like a it's like a robin. It's a thrush, very similar to a robin. And in Cuban Spanish, they call the I think it's Gorzal or something like that. The American robin is Gorzal migratorius, and this is Gorzal real. This is the real. So this is the one that I've. We saw them in a lot of places. They were in urban areas, they were in forests, and they were always striking birds to me. I just really liked them. So that's what's currently the background of my computer. So a lot of cool birds, some of them flashy, some of them not, a bunch of them endemic, some of them not, but still beautiful and enjoyable. And I think we all had a great time in Cuba. Not just with the people and the views and all of that, but with the birds as well. Thank you.
Lee or Jamie or Wes, folks from the trip, want to come up for Q&A?
Sue, come on up. Ann, Jamie.
I know you're out there. There you are.
Who else?
All right. So,
Question?
Yeah, actually, Kevin, you said that the bird is the same color as the flag. Is the flag back color because of the bird?
I don't think so.
Okay, I just wondered.
I don't think it's that well known.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's not like it's a big obvious bird all the time. They're pretty common and well distributed, but I don't think most people know it that well. So. Yeah.
The bear like an owl, does it have more difficulty of getting its prey, or does it have a different prey than other owls, since the feathers are to keep them quiet, right?
No, I mean,
What are the feathers for?
what are the feathers for? Well, for the snowy owl, like in the Fuertes painting back there, that they're heavily feathered all over their toes, and that's to keep them warm. But for most owls do have feathered legs, and a lot of them feathered toes. I don't think they necessarily serve a function. It's just that it's something to hold over that all owls just have. Some owls don't, especially some of the fishing owls. That a lot of those, but not all of the fish concentrating owls. The one genus, there are two genera of owls that are like ospreys. They even have spicules on their toes like an osprey does to hold slipperfish. And one of the genus, the genera has bare legs and the other doesn't. But I don't know of any. I'm not sure how many other ones don't. This is just kind of a quirk of something. I don't think it necessarily serves a function.
Go ahead, Tom.
Okay. The solitaire, when you played the song, it sounded very much like a buried thrush. And I remember Fran's brother was traveling in the western U.S., I believe, and he heard one of me, and he said it sounded like squealing brakes.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought when I first heard that.
Yeah.
That you said it was a thrush.
Yeah, very similar thing. The others, there are a bunch of solitaires. We have Townsend Solitaire out west that has an interesting call, and then there are other solitaires as you go into Latin America, and all of them have very beautiful or very strange songs. Very, very striking and loud, most of them.
Yeah.
Yep, squealing brakes is good.
Based on your interaction with the people in Cuba, how would you compare the way that the people value their birds in comparison to people in the United States? Do they feed them like we do? Do they seem like they're interested in the conservation of these birds?
Well, they don't feed them like we do.
They do not.
Because they cannot. They don't have any money. Right, that's the thing is that.
They don't have any birdseed.
Yeah.
With the exception of that one place that had the hummingbird
I
feeders,
saw the
there was no other bird feeding unless the bird was food, so like your chickens, kind of thing.
Didn't that your impression, guys?
But there were a couple, was it the guy who had the blind who kind of was a big hunter and then switched to conservation? So they are appreciating birds as a source of tourism. And a lot of the places when we had our Alejandro, our birder, but he knew birders in the area. So we would go to a particular site, a rice field, and he would know the people there and what birds were there. And so we hired these very local people as we went along, and they were birders and conservationists. So I think it's becoming more a thing because they realize that other people are interested in it.
Yeah, I think that I got the impression that there was a background level of interest in the birds, and that it may be increasing. Certainly, ecotourism all around the world is getting lots more people interested in birds, their local birds.
Did you see any mammals or lizards, snakes?
Too few. There is an endemic rodent there that we saw in the zoo, and that was about as big as a little bigger than a muskrat. We did not see any snakes. We saw a few anolis lizards and things like that.
Any crabs?
What's that?
Yes.
Oh.
You did, Janie.
Janie, you want to talk about the
crabs?
crabs?
Over to the shore.
We were swimming in the,
Cenote.
What's that called?
Cenote.
the cenote, yeah. There was a bright red crab floating on a piece of driftwood. And so I picked it up to show everyone. So of course I was swimming, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we had there actually at that place. We were in a restaurant, and one of those crabs was walking underneath the tables through the restaurant, and it climbed up on this one woman's purse and was just like trying to see what I could find in there. And we did have at least a couple of tarantulas too.
Yeah, I had a picture of one.
Yeah.
Was there like a general consensus on what were your guys' favorite places to bird?
What are our favorite what?
Places.
I don't think
I
we
like
took
the
a vote.
shorebirds. We saw flamingos.
Yeah, I didn't get into we did go to the shore and saw flamingos and a great reddish egret display and where that Cuban Blackhawk was. I was going to put some flamingo pictures in, but flamingos are everywhere. You know, it's like, they're in Florida and Texas right now. We don't need to see those from Cuba.
So my favorite place was in this forest, was this hollow palm tree that was really wide at the bottom, then got narrow, and then got wide again, and it was a dead palm. And in the bottom part of it was a Ferdinand flicker living, and on the upper part was a bare-legged owl. And so the guy went over and knocked, like anybody home, and the owl came right out and flew off and flew all around. But the flicker didn't come out, so he says, we'll come back later. So about 3 hours later, came back and knocked on the bottom, and then the Ferdinand's flicker came out, and oh my gosh, the stripes that go all the way up to the bill. It's like so different looking from our flicker. Yeah, yeah.
How endangered are some of these birds? Is there anything to say?
Yeah, actually our little guide talks about a number of them that are endangered. Some of them are very endangered. Yeah, I don't know. But there is, again, a little bit of, they're not cutting down all the forests and doing massive habitat destruction because there's no point. There isn't a lot of call for that to fund big businesses because there ain't none. I mean, the place is fairly depressing actually, in some respects, because it just looks like, you know, when I don't know why, but as a kid, it's like, oh, this is this foreign country, and it's just, you know, I've been to Key West and stuff, and it's just right there. And there are parrots and all that stuff, and these things that come over from Cuba to Florida, and it's just so cool. And it's like, why have we had such bad relations with this? It's just, you know, go back a long way, and it's just like we've been jerks, and it's really hard to not feel that way when you go there. It's just so promising. They just have, you know, they've been making do, but it's like the one guide said, you know, we don't have anything like that people want. It's like sugarcane was about the best that they could do as an export, and with all these embargo type things on them, it's just very difficult to get things in and out of the country, and it's just such a shame because it would be so cool. And there are flights from Miami to Havana every day that I had no idea was true, but it would be so cool to be able to do that. I mean, how many people have seen Guys and Dolls? Right, the musical where the woman who's the Salvation Army woman and the gambler, and he's making a bet that he can take her out to dinner or something like that, and so they're in New York, and he takes her to Havana because you can get there in that, you know, in a couple of hours, and it used to be that way. In fact, they said that the closing of Cuba created Las Vegas because all of the big hotels and gambling joints were in Havana, and which again is just it's like a half-hour flight from Miami. I mean, it's just nothing. And they said that they moved all of that action to Las Vegas, but it was going to be there, and it's just a shame, you know, through the
I just wanted to comment. Actually, Canada has never really stopped their tourism there. And when I went to Cuba about 10 years ago, I drove up to Toronto, and I got a nonstop flight all the way to eastern Cuba to Oakland. and it was cheap. It was like
Yeah.
$400, and it was like took 4 hours. It was, you know, so they've never stopped it. It was a plane full of all these Canadians going there to have a good
Yeah.
time. So
And the people there, they talk about the Obama years.
right, yeah, he tried
They got really optimistic, like, okay, this is gonna be the end of the blockade, and we can
Right.
trade, and we can get stuff in, and we can build our businesses, and then that ended.
Yeah.
I have time for a couple more questions. Anyone else?
I have a Jody question.
Yeah.
You talked about when I went to Cuba, we stayed in people's houses. How did you get all this many people into individual houses? A lot of houses.
So these houses
Is it still
are
a drop off?
not like your house and my house.
Right.
A lot of them are buildings that have multiple rooms. There are multiple bedrooms, and each bedroom usually has a bathroom. But then there's like a common area maybe for meals and stuff. But we stayed, there were 13 of us, we stayed in four houses that were like up and down the street. So many of the people could stay in one place, they could kind of have their meals together. Stephanie and I were in a building. My room was kind of in the back, her room was in the front, but her breakfast table was out on her veranda right outside her room, mine.
I
so
didn't
we
need
never,
the motorcycle headlight thing.
yeah, so that's how.
So you could group people?
Yeah.
Okay.
One last question, Ken.
The ratio between birds that can excavate their own nest cavities and birds that nest in cavities but can't excavate. We're at a premium up here. Are there a lot of woodpeckers down there that will turn over their nest cavities to a non-excavating but nest cavity nesting bird?
Sure. You know, woodpeckers are architects of ecosystems all around the world, and there are certain places where they're pretty important. You know, because there are a lot of secondary nest cavities. Take a look at sapsucker woods. You know, it's the same thing. We have a bunch of woodpeckers, and we have a lot of things that use it. There are some birds in the neotropics that will excavate their own holes, but like chickadees can do that in punky wood, but they can't do it in living hardwood, right? And so again, there are things like parrots that can rip open stuff and get into those. Barbets do some of that as well. You know, a number of other bird families that we don't have representatives of can do that. But yeah, the woodpeckers are always a valued member of the local ecosystem for sure.
All right, our president is standing
That's
and
because
moving
I
us.
want to let you do this, but okay, I have to do it. I want to thank the presenters for a great presentation.